Cassandra, I'm going to go ahead and turn to you because I think that last comment by Robin is a great way to transition over here. As devastating as COVID has been, I think one of the things it has done is brought attention to the pharma industry and to clinical trials. People now understand that if you want a cure for something or if you want a vaccine for something, you really have to go through clinical trials to make sure it's safe and effective before we can start giving it to our population. And I think I read something recently that said the reputation of pharma has actually been creeping up a little bit this past year now that people understand our mission better and what we're trying to do. But can you talk about this from your perspective as someone at a sponsor company? Talk to us about this drive for inclusion of communities of color in clinical trials.
Sure, and thank you so much, Ed, for having me here today. So, Sharday and Robin touched on so many really important concepts and themes, and I think to your point about with COVID, now there's a greater understanding about clinical research. There's never really been a time that at dinner tables and breakfast tables and in social circles, people are actually talking about clinical. People are aware of clinical research and at least have some understanding about what it is, but are then it's a topic of conversation. So this is something that it's a really nice. It's unfortunate that it's as a result of COVID, but it's a really nice change to see people wanting to get more information about clinical research and really understand it a bit better. But again, like I think my colleagues on the panel touched on some really important things, and I want to just pull on really quickly one thing that that Robin just said in her last closing around what it's going to take to move the needle in this space, and really leading with humility, leading with empathy, and I like to talk about leading this charge and leading this change with heart. Now is really the time. We're talking about issues and how do we move the needle, where we have to be leading from a place of truly desiring to move things forward and not being afraid to fail quickly, but fail and really connect with people and understand the position that certain individuals are in. One of the things that Robin mentioned was, we're on broadband. She has a nice, FiOS internet connection, and yeah, that's just something that everybody doesn't have. And even within the groups, even within the groups that we're looking to have greater representation, are there segments? So I'm Black, right? I also have a really great broadband, network. Mine isn't through FiOS, but still, there's a certain level of privilege and a certain level of means that I have that others from the Black population may not have. And it's really important that we're looking at people where they are and figuring out what are the barriers for for those individuals instead of looking at it like from the groups. And I think that's something that's really, really, critically important. So I just wanted to talk about that because it all really speaks to that connection and really understanding where people are and what they need, and really connecting on a more human basis. So sorry, just had to throw that in there because I was dancing in my chair here when I heard Robin talk about that humility and really that being one of the things that's going to change the needle and move the needle is looking at people as individuals. But that wasn't Oh, please.
That's okay. Let me just throw in one question before you move on, because I love what you're saying here, leading with humility, with empathy, with heart. And some people might be wondering, when you're talking to minority communities, how exactly do you do that? Because I have to think it's not sending stuff in the mail and saying, here, read this and come in and take part in a trial. It almost sounds like the barber shop that Robin mentioned earlier. I feel like you have to go to the communities. You have to talk to these people face to face. You have to interact with their families and help them understand not why you need them, but what it is you're doing and why it's important and why we need for them to be a part of it, not just for themselves, but for the whole community. Is that what we're referring to here, or is it something different?
From my perspective, yes, I really think so. There's when you think about how you can interact with people, like I think first of all, like you said, you have to understand what motivates them, what drives them. So, culturally, I think some of the groups that are underrepresented in trials, the way they interact as, a culture, a community is very much so based on principles of family, based on principles of connection, based on friendship and, social gatherings. And so it's really difficult for people. And then just before I go there, you layer on some of the mistrust that we've talked a lot about during our time together this morning. You layer on different things, and it's like, no, sometimes it's old school. It's, not the apps necessarily, although there's a place for them. But, there's not all the technology. There's not all the fancy gadgets and gadgets. It's really just face to face, or in our current state, virtual, getting to people and having a conversation with them. There was a gentleman at one of the events where Janssen had a booth set up, and it was, a public event, and people were coming up to the booth to find out, what we were there for, what were we talking about, what were we giving out. And this gentleman came, and between me and a colleague who was also staffing the booth, we talked to him for about an hour and a half, just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, because he had a lot of questions. He had a lot of mistrust and distrust about medicine and government and science and, certainly clinical research. But it was talking to him and investing that time in understanding what his concerns were, and then being able to, point him in a different direction. Now, I can't say from that interaction that he walked away and now he's the biggest cheerleader for clinical research or science or medicine. But at least, at the end, I could see him like shake his head like, okay, then gave me a handshake and, went about his business. So he hopefully learned something that he didn't know before. I was able to accommodate the conversation. And that's what I mean, because that's scary. That's very scary. People have a lot of mistrust that they have, and a lot of feelings, and emotions that this all brings up. So you have to be fearless, I think, in the pursuit. And that's where the leading with heart and really connecting with people comes into play.